Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. As Professor said, I will be presenting English teachers' experiences in participatory curriculum development for their territory. This was a study I conducted in the context of my master's research, and it's also part of a broader research agenda, and community engagement agenda in our research group. To begin, I'd like to set the scene for the rationale behind my study. Um, as we know, English has been positioned as this sort of key that opens many doors to academic mobility, economic opportunities, global citizenship, and this has resulted in many policies, language education policies in our country that have resulted in national standards, benchmarks for evaluating schools based on the Common European Framework of Reference, the CEFR, and it has led to the inclusion of an English component in the Saber 11 and Saber Pro tests. And though these policies and curriculum guidelines claim to aim for equity, in practice, they assume many things about Colombian schools that do not necessarily hold true in rural areas. Things like school infrastructure, ease of access, ease of connectivity, and at the same time, rural teachers, especially those in multi-grade rural schools, face many barriers to many things: professional development, resource allocation, as well as lack of decision-making in curriculum design. So the issue is not only of adapting the standards, the textbooks, the syllabi into something that is more contextually relevant for rural areas, is also being excluded from curriculum design processes. In the Colombian ELT literature there is plenty of studies and scholarship around critiquing these policies, especially over the last 10 years. But there hasn't been enough exploration of what rural teachers do in terms of curriculum development in these complex, challenging areas. So the study that I present today aimed to address this gap through the following research question: how does PCD, Participatory Curriculum Development process, shape the experiences of multi-grade rural teachers in their effort to create territory-sensitive curricula? The study had three main objectives. The first one was to explore the lived experiences of teachers as they engage in this PCD process. Second, I wanted to explore the challenges they encounter as they did this. And finally, I wanted to understand how a PCD process contributes to teachers' professional development, especially in terms of their agency and their teacher identity. I'm gonna go quick in my theoretical framework, just so that I have enough time for the findings. But essentially, my study is framed under Grandi's curriculum framework that sees curriculum along a continuum of three interrelated orientations to curriculum. That sees, the first one sees curriculum as a product. In this one, curriculum is seen as a predetermined set of objectives that are often dictated by external agents like textbooks designers, international organizations like the British Council, international frameworks like the CEFR, or ministries of education. And the role of the teachers under this view is that of an implementer. They're in charge of delivering the content that the experts created, and then they have to assess whether these predetermined objectives have been met. In contrast, we have the process orientation to curriculum that sees it as something that emerges through interaction. So in this view, learning is co-constructed, and teachers have more autonomy to interpret and shape the content of their curriculum in terms of their students' needs and their classrooms dynamics. Finally, we have the praxis orientation, which adds a critical and emancipatory dimension to the process view. So not only views curriculum as co-constructed, but is reflective, and it is socially responsive. Under this view, teachers and learners get together to examine their realities and use curriculum to transform these realities. Additionally to these orientations, for my study, I included two additional conceptual lenses, which is PCD, Participatory Curriculum Development, which in essence means when teachers, students, community stakeholders become co-decision makers in the curriculum development process. And then I have the territorial approach to education that insists that educational processes like curriculum design should be grounded in the sociocultural, economic, and geographical realities of a given place. In my study, that place was El Carmen de Viboral and its rural veredas. All right, so for the research methodology, the study was designed as a case study, qualitative case study, and I used grounded theory approaches for data analysis. The study took place in two rural multi-grade schools in El Carmen de Viboral. These were two satellite schools of a bigger urban school closer to the city center in El Carmen de Viboral, but the two schools were very far away from this main institution. And the participants were two female teachers, monodocentes. That means they're in charge of the whole school. They are principals, security guards, builders, chefs, cleaners. They are in charge of the whole thing in their respective schools. The first one is Flora, a veteran math teacher. She's a math teacher with over 15 years of experience in the public sector, and also Manuela, who was a younger early childhood educator. What else? And the data collection included data from group discussions, which I recorded and transcribed. I conducted individual interviews with these teachers, 2 individual interviews per teacher, so in total I had 4. We also conducted document analysis, especially around the existing syllabi in the schools, as well as the national guidelines and the curriculum products that the teachers were creating during the PCD process. And finally, my researcher's journal. This will be the moment to explain the larger curriculum development process that served as the setting for my research. It was a participatory initiative called Maestras Creadoras de Inglés, Maestras Creadoras de Currículos en Inglés en Clave de Territorio. It was a BUPE project approved in 2023 and implemented in 2024. It involved a teacher network of 15 teachers from El Carmen de Viboral, the support of the local Secretary of Education, and 3 professors from Universidad de Antioquia, including myself. And to operationalize that extension project, we divided the big group into 3 nodes of a bigger network. 2 nodes were focused on the urban settings, the urban schools, and the 3rd node was focused on the rural multi-grade schools, where I did the work with Flora and Manuela. Okay, so now I would like to explain briefly the PCD process that we went through. First, we did a critical reading of the territory through social cartography. Basically, we enlisted the help of students and their families in mapping out the English assets that were present in their veredas. After that, we created and implemented a needs analysis instrument to find out what the students wanted to learn in terms of English, what were their insecurities, their lacks, their necessities. After the needs analysis, we engaged in collegial dialogue, analyzing the curriculum structure in the schools, and based on that analysis, came up with guiding curricular principles that were more attuned to the multi-grade rural setting. Finally, we did the syllabus design, collecting the information from the 3 previous phases. So the first finding, I grouped it under this category called Ya está aquí en el territorio. Basically, this category summarizes a big shift in the participant teachers' views, especially views regarding the role of English in the rural areas. Initially, both teachers had very different views around English. They were not English teachers, by the way, math teacher and early education teacher. And they had very different views of English that were changed through the PCD process. So Flora, for example, she didn't think English was relevant. She said, English is like a luxury, something that doesn't apply to the rural lives of my students. And for Manuela, it was a bit the opposite. For Manuela, English is this big thing that opens the doors to a broader world, a better world, a world outside of the veredas. So both teachers had a bit of narrow views of English, but through the social cartography project, they started to realize their views were a bit mistaken, let's say. Because, for example, for Manuela, for Flora, her students started mapping how English was present in road sign flower shops that were intended for export. So they would put the flower prices in English. And the students also mapped how the Airbnbs and the ecotourism fincas around the vereda inside where their parents worked, they would have menus, documents, ecotourism guides, both in English and Spanish, obviously for foreigners that would visit that area. And also the students mapped out in their own homes interactions with English, informal interactions, through TikTok, YouTube, and other forms of media like music and movies. So this surprised Flora quite a lot because she didn't expect it. In fact, she started to see English as something that could bridge what was happening in the schools with what was happening outside of the schools. There is this really cool anecdote she mentioned in one of the group discussions. The students mapped a Cornare finca that was close to the school that housed a Cornare educator, the administrative Antioquia organization around diversity, preservation. And one of these educators used to visit the school all the time to talk to the kids about the animals, the diversity, preservation, but he had stopped going to the school for a long time. And the students were curious about him because he would always tell of his travels where he would talk about Colombia's biodiversity abroad. And so they connected English to this Cornare educator. And then they decided they wanted to go and see what happened to him because they missed him a lot. And they actually did that project. And in the end, the Cornare educator was fine. He was just very busy. So this shifted Flora's perception that English could be used to bridge both what was happening inside of the school and outside of the school. Okay, I'm gonna go a little bit quicker for Manuela, who believed, again, English is this big door to broader opportunities. The mapping process actually really revealed proof that she was right because the students mapped like all of the local industries and the relationship with English and how it helped the families, develop economic opportunities. But there was one turning point, which is when the parents wrote in the WhatsApp group of the parents that they had, like, hey, teacher, why are you doing a map for the English class? Isn't English supposed to be drills, repetition, grammar practice? Why are you doing these maps of the vereda? They didn't understand. So Manuela had to become, as she mentioned here, defensive. Because ellos siempre dicen que los niños no aprenden nada. Traté de explicarles que lo que estábamos haciendo no era solo memorizar, que estábamos conectando el inglés con lo que los niños conocían. And in defending that in front of the parents, made her realize that she had also had a very limited view of the role of English in the territory. She was in the same place as the parents. And through this engagement with the parents, realized there was a lot of potential, not just for the future uses of English, of social mobility, of traveling or going to university, but in that moment in the vereda. The second category speaks to a major concern for both Flora and Manuela. The the sense that English curriculum was not designed with them in mind. Throughout the PCD process, especially the third stage, the collegial dialogue, these teachers confronted the mismatch between the curriculum design that was present in the institution and the rural multi-grade realities they had in their immediate context. And these syllabi, because I did the document analysis of them, they're aligned with the CEFR, they are aligned with the standards, and they follow this grade by grade progression of objectives and goals. It's very product-based. And so obviously, there was a big mismatch between the reality of the teachers and that syllabi, because it assumed, for example, uninterrupted teaching of English, like blocks of teaching. But in rural schools, especially multi-grade rural schools, you cannot have 2 hours for English, no, because sometimes the smaller kids, they haven't had breakfast, whereas the bigger kids, they finish breakfast really quick. So it creates this staggered dynamic inside the classroom. So the institutional syllabi for English didn't really fit what they had in their own context. But for these teachers, the disconnect was not just logistical, it was deeply personal. They expressed a lot of frustrations. For example, Flora expressed her frustration at the fact that the Ministry of Education hadn't released the guías for Escuela Nueva for English. They had released the ones for Spanish, for math, but not for English. So that further reinforced the idea that el inglés no está pensado para nosotras. I'm gonna go a bit quicker now because what's especially important about the dialogue phase of the PCD process is that these constraints generated in the teachers feelings of marginalization and professional inadequacy. But getting together to analyze the curriculum, get to the conclusion that it was not made for them, quickly release them of these feelings of inadequacy, because it was not their fault that they couldn't meet all of the different goals for each grade in a multi-grade classroom. It was the curriculum's fault. And in doing that, they became very empowered and actually came to the point that they wanted to advocate for other teachers in their same situation. They wanted to create a curriculum that really reflected the realities of Escuela Nueva teachers. The final category, I'm gonna go a bit quicker here, no es un recetario, es un diálogo constante. The gist of this category is these teachers had made incredible acrobatics to adapt the imposed curriculum from the ministry, from the institutional syllabi that was graded, but they never considered all of these adaptations as a legitimate curriculum design. They just considered it experiments, little experiments to adjust a curriculum that was not meant for them. But through the PCD process, they realized, in fact, these were instances of curriculum design, because in the second phase of the process, they sat down and created a needs analysis instrument in which they actively, proactively wanted to search for their students' needs. And that couldn't be framed as simple adaptation. When you create a needs analysis instrument, implement it, and analyze the results, that's not a passive action, that is very active. So connecting these dots, these 3 categories, what I could say from this study is that PCD does work to help teachers, especially those in marginalized areas, to move from product orientation constraints towards a more praxis-oriented and empowerment through participatory processes. Also, this PCD approach does provide a concrete mechanism not to just criticize the lack of fit of a curriculum to a given place, but it gives actionable steps that teachers can take to make the curriculum more relevant for their immediate realities. And also, it provides potential to address the urban-rural gap that people so often talk about. And teachers, through this process, gain the tools to advocate for contextually appropriate goals. I had more slides, implications, future research. What I would like to say is that there is a need to embed more territory responsive principles in ELT policy frameworks. We need to support teacher networks because collegial dialogue, getting together to analyze the needs of a given place has amazing potential for professional development. And involving the community only brings good things. These two teachers constantly were headbutting against the families, the parents, and just doing a simple social cartography project bridged that gap and involved the community so that they could have a voice in what is taught in the English classes. I just wanted to give a quick acknowledgement to my advisor, Paula Andrea Echeverri, to Flora and Manuela, the two amazing teachers that worked with me during this process, the network of English teachers in El Carmen de Viboral, the Secretary of Education, and Universidad de Antioquia. That's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cristian. Do you have any questions? ¿Tienen preguntas para Cristian? ¿Comentarios? ¿Y hay una mano levantada?
Yo me preguntaba, pues entiendo que esto es más como estudio de caso en el Carmen de Viboral en unas escuelas específicas, pero sí encuentro pues como ese enfoque diferencial de adaptación de estos currículos que da el ministerio a las realidades locales. Sí, también a lo largo de la investigación del proyecto se preguntaron en las diferencias incluso entre lo rural, ¿cierto? Como los diferentes municipios de diferentes categorías, que incluso entre el Carmen de Viboral y, no sé, Nariño, Antioquia, pongamos otro ejemplo, hay algunas diferencias en cómo adaptar ese currículo, ¿no? Ese proceso, y si en esos futuros estudios está como la proyección de llevarlo a otros casos, otros estudios de caso, por ejemplo.
Súper, gracias por la pregunta. Sí, en efecto, o sea, incluso porque las dos profes trabajan en veredas distintas, que es que el Carmen es grandísimo y la verdad son muy diferentes las cosas que terminaron mapeando. Si bien hay cosas en común, mucha floricultura, cultivos de café, de tomate, hay cosas diferentes. Por ejemplo, en el caso de Flora, ella sí tenía muchos Airbnbs y fincas de este tipo en el que muchos extranjeros vienen a pasar el tiempo porque queda muy cerca la autopista. En cambio, la otra donde trabaja Manuela, eso no se vio tanto en el mapeo. Y yo sé que en el proyecto grande, donde mis demás compañeros acompañaron al resto de la red de maestros en el mapeo de las escuelas urbanas del Carmen, porque eso lo hicieron también, surgieron cosas súper diferentes. Por ejemplo, allá la vocación es la cerámica. Y eso surgió muchísimo en ese mapeo. Es muy diferente a lo que nosotros vimos en las veredas. Entonces, sí, dentro de los municipios ya hay territorios muy diferenciados. Y en cuanto a la otra parte de tu pregunta, sí, esa es la idea. La idea es continuar en esta agenda de investigación, porque pues consideramos que puede ser una estrategia, una herramienta para de verdad como que cerrar esas brechas tan marcadas que hoy vemos entre la educación rural y la educación urbana, no solamente en términos de alcanzar niveles de inglés según una prueba estandarizada, sino en términos de todo, ¿cierto? De que los profes, las comunidades, las familias que viven en un sector rural no se sientan inferiores en comparación a las que existen en una zona más urbana, por ejemplo. Entonces, sí, gracias.
Gracias, Cristian.